Nature in Walden and the Adventures of Huck Finn. In the book Walden I'm reading for the class, an author named Henry David Thoreau is talking about nature. What's happening in nature is that when Thoreau starts to observe it, he begins to see an endless source of wisdom, beauty, and spiritual nourishment. In the novel, The Adventures of Huck Finn by Mark Twain, the randomness and power of nature play a noticeable role. Huck and Jim create a raft, and then they go on a journey together down the river in the wild. Thoreau has a passion for wildlife. He lives in a cabin and has his own pond called Walden Pond. He happens to regard nature in the book with great respect and surprise while also having a very close understanding and well-being. Nature happens to be the endless environment that the author never fails to see, and it also becomes a dominant symbol in his own life. As a matter of fact, he happens to live off it. Nature offers him some food, fuel, shelter, and it accomplishes all his other requirements that are physical. Also, it is a home that is so much larger than his household or any town. It's big enough for so many living organisms. Thoreau is always at home, filled with trees, grass, a pond called Walden Pond, and animals. And he's always at home because he's always in the wildlife. He doesn't leave his home to do anything else. He's the guy who writes that Walden Pond is only on the edge of town, except it's only a few miles from where he grew up. All the stuff he does in the wildlife illustrates that the wildlife and its bonuses are close by. They're not just in the lands far away where people imagine about. Furthermore, most people don't just travel, which is needless, as they have yet to love and become aware of their own backyards. Nature happens to be free to all people and allowed access. There are no strict rules against people going in the forest to either check out nature or live in it. It's also the model for the author life and the personification of easiness and independence. Throughout the entire book that the author wrote, it starts out where Thoreau is excited about having a home in the wildlife all by himself. He doesn't need anyone to take care of his own household or anything like that. He enjoys living in an environment with a beautiful pond that has Walden in the name and a nice cabin in the forest. Eventually, he seems like he gets sick and tired of being alone in nature. Seems to me like the author decides that he wants to have some company in his home. The book seems like it's telling me that Walden thought that being alone in the wild was getting old. The author of the book is considered by numerous people to be the environmental father of the organizations called Green Movement. He's the type of guy who has made so many donations to the organization that happens to be ecological. Making contributions in the environmental organizations were significant. The donations he made in the forest happen to be his most important facts, and plus his very own special reflections that are published on discussion and himself seeking the importance of life through the connection he has with wildlife. Thoreau is the type of author who uses nature as a device for learning, using the wilderness as his role model and reference point. The author also uses the wilderness to become aware of the importance of the nature's soul in the book. He starts to look for experiences in the forest. The language Thoreau decides to use develops a total comparison between foods that are apples and the divine that are interesting at the same time, two transcendentalist and spiritual opinions. In the chapter Wild Apples, he begins to reflect on the eternal quality of apples that illustrates their highest worth. The highest worth is what cannot be vulgarized, accepted, and sold. The information is like the other information in the chapter Solitude. Thoreau reminds readers that one person is never alone in solitude with the wilderness. One person starts to worship the benefits of nature and his own bottomless unity with it. In the book The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, We notice that from the very beginning that the river is where Huckleberry Huck Finn feels very quiet at peace. The loveliness, straightforwardness, unpredictability, and authority of nature represent a prominent role of the story. When the author Mark Twain illustrates the wild in the book, the readers can imagine Huck and Jim walking together in the forest or traveling down the river together. They can also imagine the trees bending over the water. Not only they end up being so droopy, they also create a covering of green and some sunlight. Not to mention they are mixed with the color gray of the Spanish moss that starts hanging down. Nature in the book is the most important theme. The reason why is because the Mississippi River is so dominant to the philosophy of the religion that is represented. It's significant that Huck Finn has so many experiences with Jim. The other reason why is because the main characters, Huck and Jim, are the only ones who are truthfully uncontrolled when they are on their raft traveling down its distance. There's a battle between civilization and human nature that is portrayed by Huckleberry Finn. He's the one who doesn't want to be civilized by civilization, and he becomes aware that nature is the correct place for him, and that succeeding his principles is the correct thing to do. He takes a good look at wildlife and notices that it's the greatest to lead a civilization and society, and his journey down the river proves that it's the view of the book. The book has so many examples. In the natural world, there is calm and peace. The ordinary world is the type of place for Huck and Finn, where they can be by themselves with their own thoughts. They can also be alive and free. The wildlife offers freedom to Huck and Finn. It happens to be Huck's ticket away from his father, who happens to be so abusive. For Jim, the river is the way to free will from slavery that is happening in the book. Huck begins to feel as though as he's in prison with all the rubrics that Miss Walden and the society located on him. Jim happens to be a slave who has no rights of his own. The Mississippi River is the type of water where Huck and Jim can both be involved in free will. In a couple of seconds away, the two guys went for a slide down the river, and it seemed like it was going well for them to be free again and all by themselves on the large river. Not to mention that there was no one there to bother them. Huck and Jim feel that way during each time when they travel down the river. Not only they travel down there, they also begin to leave the boundaries of life behind them. While they're on the river, they can be friends and appreciate each experience as it comes to them. It's just the nature in them. Having their lives on the crafty raft deepens their friendship. It happens when they float down. It's because they can communicate for more than 1 hour about anything. The water lures them in, and Mark Twain helps readers become aware that the water carries an authority over the two main characters. It holds a power of them just as all nature does. One of them can help readers enjoy the awesomeness of the Mississippi River. That character is Huckleberry Finn. The water that he and Jim were traveling on sounded like they were miles and miles diagonally. I can imagine the water moving diagonally so far away with the two travelers on it. When I think about the two exploring down the river, I can imagine them making a long trip in nature. The beauty of nature is where the author wants the reader to see it in the original world. For Mark Twain, nature is welcoming readers to what could be so scary, but still so gorgeous. Conclusion. Walden and the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn had significant information about nature. The two books invite readers to the worlds of main characters in nature. Readers can imagine what Walden, Huck, and Jim have been going through with people, animals, and water. They both share similarities that represent the main characters searching for and improving freedom in nature. The difference is that the book I'm reading is about being self reflective, and the other one is about making friends, having many adventures, and running away.